It was a rainy evening when Dr. Alina Johnson arrived at the hospital. The sky was dark, and the rain tapped against the windows of her car as she parked in the empty lot. Inside her bag were her stethoscope, a notebook, and the same calm determination she carried with her every day. She had worked at this hospital for almost a decade, dedicating her life to helping people, and she loved what she did. But that evening, she could not have imagined how the night would change everything. The emergency room was unusually quiet at first. The usual chaos of beeping monitors and hurried footsteps seemed distant, almost calm. Alina quickly changed into her scrubs and walked to the nurse station to check the patient list. The names and conditions of patients were scrolling on the board, but one case caught her attention immediately. A man had been rushed in with severe injuries from an unknown accident. He was unconscious, badly bruised and bleeding. There was no ID, and no one knew who he was. Alina's heart sank. The hospital had strict rules about operating on patients without proper authorization. Normally, she would need permission from the attending physician or the patient's family, but this man's injuries were serious. If she did not act immediately, his life could end before anyone could intervene. She glanced at the clock. Every second mattered. Her instincts took over. She called a quick team huddle and explained the situation. "We don't have time to wait," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "We need to stabilize him now or he won't make it." The nurses hesitated. One of them whispered that the hospital board might not approve of this decision, that it could cost her her career if something went wrong. Alina took a deep breath. She knew the risk, but she also knew the alternative. The team followed her lead, moving with precision. She worked tirelessly, guiding them through every step, checking vitals, administering medication, and monitoring the man's condition. Hours felt like minutes as she stayed focused, her hands steady even when fatigue threatened to take over. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside the emergency room, Alina was a whirlwind of energy and care. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the man's vitals began to stabilize. His breathing became steadier and color slowly returned to his face. Alina allowed herself a brief sigh of relief. She had done it. She had saved a life. She leaned back slightly, exhausted but satisfied, knowing she had done everything possible. But the sense of triumph was short-lived. The hospital administration did not see it the way she did. The next morning, Alina was called into the boardroom. The tension in the room was almost suffocating. Faces she had known for years looked at her with a mix of disapproval and caution. She listened as they told her she had violated hospital protocol, that she had acted without permission, and that her decision could have exposed the hospital to serious liability. Alina felt a tight knot form in her stomach. She tried to explain calmly that she had only done what any doctor would do in that situation, that she had saved a life when waiting would have meant death, but her words seemed to bounce off invisible walls. The administration had already made up their minds. Within days, she was dismissed from the hospital, the very place she had devoted her life to. The news hit her hard. Alina had always believed in justice, in doing the right thing, and in helping people no matter the cost. But now it seemed that those values were being punished. She packed her things quietly, not wanting to make a scene. Her colleagues whispered sympathy, but many avoided eye contact. Some seemed afraid to be associated with her, as if her decision had made them guilty by proximity. Walking out of the hospital for the last time, Alina felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. The sky outside was still gray, the rain soaking her coat as she stepped into her car. She started the engine but did not drive immediately. Instead, she stared through the windshield, thinking about the man she had saved, wondering what would happen to him, and questioning how a place meant to save lives could punish someone for doing just that. For the next few days, Alina struggled to find work. Hospitals and clinics were hesitant to hire her once they heard about her dismissal. Some offered vague sympathy but little opportunity. It was as if the world had turned its back on her, punishing her for choosing life over paperwork. The bills began to pile up, and the once proud doctor felt the weight of despair pressing down. Yet even in her darkest moments, Alina could not abandon her calling. She started volunteering at a small community clinic that served the homeless and the uninsured. There she met people who had nowhere else to turn, patients with chronic illnesses, injuries, and no access to proper care. Each time she treated someone, she remembered why she had become a doctor in the first place. Helping people mattered more than rules, policies, or recognition. One evening, after a long day at the clinic, Alina sat on a bench outside and let herself reflect. She thought about her family, who had always supported her, and her mother, who had told her countless times that doing the right thing often came with sacrifice but also with pride. She thought about the patient she had saved, the one she had no way of finding again. She wondered if he was okay, if he knew how much she had fought for his life. Alina realized that her dismissal had shaken her, but it had not broken her. She had seen life at its most fragile and most beautiful moments. She had saved a life when it seemed impossible, and that truth remained with her even if the world did not recognize it yet. She decided to keep going, to keep helping, and to keep believing that her actions mattered. That night, as the rain continued to fall softly against the windows of the clinic, Alina cleaned her medical tools and prepared for the next day. She thought about the countless patients she would meet, the lives she could touch, and the difference one person could make. She promised herself that no matter how unfair life seemed, she would never stop saving lives, never stop caring, and never stop standing by her principles. Little did she know that her courage, compassion, and unwavering dedication were about to come full circle. The life she had saved, the person who had unknowingly become a part of her story, was about to find her and change everything in ways she could never imagine. And so, with a heart heavy yet hopeful, Alina stepped out of the clinic ready to face whatever came next. She did not know that the next knock at her door would turn her world upside down, bringing a twist no one could have predicted. But she did know this. She had acted with integrity, she had done the right thing, and she would continue to do so, no matter the cost. After Dr. Alina Johnson was dismissed from the hospital, the days felt heavier than ever. Waking up each morning had lost its usual rhythm. There was no rushing to the emergency room, no beeping monitors demanding her attention, no patients depending on her skill. Instead, she found herself staring out the window of her small apartment, watching the city move on without her. People hurried past, carrying on with their lives, oblivious to the storm that had overturned hers. Alina tried to find work, hoping that another hospital or clinic would welcome her experience, her dedication, and her skills. But everywhere she went, the response was the same. Hesitant smiles, polite words, but no opportunity. One director even whispered, almost apologetically, that her incident at the previous hospital made them nervous. It was a blow. Not because she doubted her abilities, but because the world seemed to reward caution over courage. Doing the right thing had cost her everything she had worked for. The injustice weighed on her. She had always believed that truth and good intentions mattered, that saving a life should never be punished. But now it felt as though the system had turned its back on her. Colleagues she had trusted distanced themselves, afraid of being associated with someone who had broken protocol. Even friends outside the hospital struggled to understand the magnitude of what she was going through. Alina felt a quiet loneliness settle over her, not just the absence of work, but the absence of recognition for the choices she had made. Despite the challenges, she refused to stop helping people. She began volunteering at a small community clinic that served the homeless and those without insurance. The clinic was modest, with worn-out chairs, peeling paint, and a constant hum of activity. But for Alina, it was a place where she could still make a difference. Patients came in with ailments ranging from minor infections to serious chronic conditions, often after months of neglect. Alina treated each person with the same care she had shown in the hospital, listening patiently to their stories, checking vitals, and offering reassurance alongside medicine. It was at the clinic that she realized how much her own sense of purpose mattered. Every life she touched reminded her that her work had value, even if the larger system did not recognize it. An elderly man with a stubborn cough thanked her with tears in his eyes. A young mother, worried about her sick child, clutched her hand and whispered a quiet, "Thank you." These moments, small but powerful, reminded Alina why she had become a doctor in the first place. She began keeping a journal again, recording every patient she helped, every life she touched, and every small victory that came her way. Still, the shadow of her dismissal lingered. Nights were the hardest. Alone in her apartment, she would replay the events that had led to her being fired. She remembered the patient on the hospital stretcher, his face pale and fragile, and how every second had mattered. She remembered making the choice to operate, the fear of consequences and the relief when he stabilized. And then she remembered the shock, disbelief, and anger when the board dismissed her for doing what was right. It was a wound that refused to heal, a reminder that sometimes courage came at a personal cost. Alina's family became her anchor. Her mother, a woman of quiet strength, encouraged her not to give up. "You saved a life, Alina," she would say, her voice steady. "Never forget that. They may not see it, but the world will notice eventually. What you did matters, and it will come back to you in ways you cannot imagine." Her mother's words were comforting, but they could not erase the frustration and sadness she felt. Alina began to understand the depth of systemic barriers, how institutions often punished those who challenged rules, even when rules stood in the way of doing good. Despite the uncertainty, Alina refused to let bitterness take root. She began reaching out to medical organizations, attending conferences, and connecting with other doctors who had faced similar challenges. She realized that while she might have lost her position at the hospital, her knowledge, skills, and integrity were still hers. She also began mentoring young medical students, many of whom were struggling to navigate a system that sometimes seemed indifferent to courage. She shared her experiences openly, teaching them that the right choice was not always the easiest, and that integrity would always matter in the long run. At the clinic, Alina met people from all walks of life, people society often ignored or overlooked. There was a man who had been living on the streets for months, suffering from untreated diabetes. There was a young woman who had fled an abusive household, carrying both physical and emotional scars. Each encounter was a reminder that her calling was not tied to a hospital title or a paycheck. It was tied to the impact she could make in the lives of others. These experiences began to give her a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet confidence that even without official recognition, she could still change the world one life at a time. One afternoon, while reviewing patient charts at the clinic, Alina received a phone call that made her pause. It was from a social worker who had been helping the man she had operated on at the hospital, the patient who had no ID. Alina listened carefully as the worker described his progress. He had recovered remarkably well, despite the severity of his injuries. He was now stable, his family had been located, and he had expressed a deep desire to meet her. Alina felt a surge of emotion. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope and validation. She had saved a life, and that life had not only survived but thrived. The news gave her renewed energy. She began planning ways to expand her volunteer work, organizing small health awareness workshops for underserved communities. She collaborated with local organizations offering free checkups, basic treatments, and guidance on healthy living. Word spread about her dedication, and more patients began coming to the clinic, grateful for her time and attention. Alina started to see that even in the absence of a hospital title, she could still be a leader in her field, someone whose actions inspired trust and hope. Yet, Alina could not escape the questions that lingered in the back of her mind. Why had the hospital punished her for doing the right thing? How could a system that existed to save lives turn its back on someone who had just done that? These thoughts haunted her late at night, but they also fueled her determination. She realized that part of her journey was to expose the unfairness she had experienced, not out of revenge, but to ensure that no other doctor would face the same injustice for acting with compassion. Through it all, Alina grew stronger in ways she had never anticipated. The dismissal that had once felt like the end of her world became a catalyst for personal growth, resilience, and a deeper understanding of her purpose. She learned that life would test her values and that courage sometimes came with isolation, but the right choice was always worth it. She also learned to find joy in small victories, a patient smiling after recovery, a child getting the care they needed, or a simple thank you from someone whose life she had touched. Alina's days became a balance of hope and challenge, joy and struggle. Each patient reminded her why she could not give up. Each obstacle reminded her that integrity mattered more than recognition. And each night as she returned to her quiet apartment, she would reflect on the day, grateful for the lives she had impacted and hopeful for the future. Little did Alina know that her patience and perseverance were about to be rewarded in a way she could never have imagined. The man whose life she had saved, the one who had unknowingly become part of her story, was searching for her. He had no idea that his determination to find her would soon bring a series of events that would shock everyone, expose injustice and change both of their lives forever. And so, even as Alina continued her quiet work at the clinic, helping those who needed her most, the seeds of an unexpected reunion were already being sown. Her courage, compassion, and unwavering dedication had not gone unnoticed. The world had turned its back on her once, but soon, it would be forced to recognize the truth and the impact of her selfless actions, more powerfully than anyone could have imagined. It was a chilly, overcast evening when Dr. Alina Johnson returned to her small apartment after a long day at the community clinic. The streets were damp from an earlier rain, and the city lights reflected off the wet pavement, creating a quiet, almost magical atmosphere. Alina felt a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. She had spent hours seeing patients, providing care, and answering questions, and though she was tired, her heart was full. Helping people always gave her a sense of purpose that no job title or recognition could match. As she approached her door, she noticed a figure standing on the porch. At first, she thought it was a neighbor or someone delivering a package. But something about the presence felt different, calm yet urgent. She unlocked the door, stepping outside with cautious curiosity. The figure stepped forward, and Alina's heart skipped a beat. It was him, the patient she had operated on at the hospital. The man whose life had been hanging by a thread when she had taken the risk that cost her everything. He was no longer the fragile, unconscious man she had first met in the emergency room. He looked healthier now, though he still had the faint marks of the injuries she remembered. He smiled gently, his eyes full of gratitude and a quiet determination. "Dr. Johnson?" he asked softly. His voice was steady, but there was an intensity that made Alina step back slightly. She nodded, unable to find words immediately. The shock of seeing him in person at her doorstep was overwhelming. "I'm Daniel," he continued, though she had long since imagined what he would say. "You saved my life." His words were simple, but they carried weight, filling the space between them with emotion. Alina blinked, trying to process everything. I remember you," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. "You're the man from the ER." Her mind raced as memories of that night flooded back. The urgency, the fear, the determination to act when no one else could. Daniel nodded. "Yes, I've been trying to find you ever since I woke up in the hospital. I needed to meet the person who gave me a second chance at life." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I didn't know your name at first, but I wanted to thank you properly. And I wanted to tell you that I know what happened. And it's not right." Alina felt a lump in her throat. For weeks she had carried the weight of her dismissal like a stone in her chest. She had questioned herself, her choices, even her worth. And now here was the man whose life she had saved, standing in front of her, acknowledging everything she had done. His gratitude and respect made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt since leaving the hospital. Daniel continued. "When I recovered, I realized I had to find you. I needed to tell you that your decision to act when you did saved my life. Not just that. It changed my life. I wanted to repay you in any way I could." Alina listened, her emotions a mix of relief, surprise, and cautious hope. She had never expected this moment. He explained that he had been working behind the scenes, trying to understand what had happened at the hospital. He had heard whispers that she had been dismissed, and the thought outraged him. How could someone be punished for saving a life? Daniel told her that he had even contacted people he knew, gathering information and following leads to locate her. And now, after weeks of searching, he had found her. Alina invited him inside, feeling a strange mix of nervousness and anticipation. They sat at her small kitchen table, the dim light casting warm shadows on the walls. Daniel shared his story, how he had regained consciousness, struggled through his recovery, and finally understood the magnitude of what she had done for him. He spoke of the fear he had felt, the gratitude he carried, and the determination to make sure she received recognition. "I can't change what the hospital did," Daniel said quietly, "but I can try to make sure the truth comes out. You deserve that more than anyone I know." Alina felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent so long feeling invisible, punished for doing the right thing, and here was someone who not only understood, but wanted to act on her behalf. Over the next few hours, they talked about everything: the patient's recovery, her dismissal, the challenges she faced at the clinic, and the frustration of being overlooked despite her dedication. Daniel listened intently, offering encouragement without judgment. Alina realized how much she had needed this moment. not just gratitude, but someone who genuinely understood the courage and risk it had taken for her to act in that emergency room. As the night grew late, Daniel hesitated before speaking again. "I want to help you," he said, his voice earnest. "Not just to thank you, but to support you. You've given me a second chance at life. I want to make sure you get the opportunities you deserve. And I want to show the world what you did, and how unfairly you were treated." Alina felt a mix of surprise and apprehension. She had been navigating her life quietly, helping patients in her small clinic, avoiding the spotlight that had brought her trouble before. But Daniel's words sparked something inside her, a hope she hadn't felt in weeks. Perhaps this was the chance to reclaim what had been taken from her, to stand not just for herself but for the principle of doing what is right. Over the following days, Daniel worked quietly to support her. He offered guidance, resources, and connections that she had never imagined. Together, they began to think about how to bring attention to the injustice she had faced without compromising her integrity or her work at the clinic. Alina realized that she had not been forgotten, and that her actions had not gone unnoticed. Someone believed in her, truly believed in the courage she had shown that night. This reunion also changed Alina personally. She found herself more confident, more determined, and more willing to speak out about the unfair treatment she had endured. The encounter reminded her that her choices, though costly, were meaningful. Saving lives mattered, and sometimes recognition followed in unexpected ways. But Daniel's visit also brought another lesson: that human connection could be as powerful as any medical skill. Seeing the man she had saved, hearing his gratitude, and witnessing his determination to support her reinforced the idea that every act of kindness had a ripple effect. Alina began to see that her life and work were intertwined with the people she helped in ways she could not always predict. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel continued to keep in touch, checking on the clinic and offering encouragement. He was not there to overshadow her work, but to amplify it, to ensure that the dedication and courage she had shown did not go unnoticed. Alina found herself energized, thinking of new ways to expand the clinic to reach more patients, and to use her experiences to teach younger doctors about the importance of compassion and courage. The encounter at her door became a turning point. It reminded her that no matter how lonely or difficult the path might seem, her actions had meaning. It showed her that sometimes the reward for courage was not immediate and not always visible to everyone, but it would come in its own time and form. For Alina, the man at her door represented not just gratitude, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where her integrity, skill, and compassion would finally be recognized. That evening, as Daniel left, promising to stay in touch and help however he could, Alina stood at her door and watched him disappear into the night. The city lights reflected off the wet streets, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of hope that went beyond her work at the clinic. She realized that her life was about to change in ways she could never have anticipated. The man she had saved had returned, not just to thank her, but to help her reclaim the dignity, respect, and recognition that had been unfairly taken away. Alina knew the journey ahead would not be easy. There would still be challenges, obstacles, and resistance from those who preferred rules over compassion. But for the first time in weeks, she felt ready. Ready to face the world again. Ready to fight for what was right, and ready to embrace the unexpected twists that life sometimes offered. The knock at her door had changed everything. The life she had saved had found her, and with it came hope, opportunity, and the promise of justice. The days after Daniel's visit were filled with a new energy for Dr. Alina Johnson. She had always been a quiet person, focusing on her work and letting her actions speak for themselves. But now, with Daniel's support and encouragement, she began to see a way to share her story, to show the world the truth about what had happened at the hospital. The injustice she had endured no longer felt like a burden she carried alone. Daniel had connections and influence that Alina had never imagined. He began by asking questions, trying to understand the situation fully. Together, they reviewed the timeline of events. The night the patient had arrived, the critical decisions she had made, the successful outcome, and the sudden dismissal that followed. As they pieced it together, it became clear that the hospital had acted harshly, not because of incompetence or negligence, but because they feared controversy, especially given Alina's race. It was a truth Alina had suspected, but hearing it confirmed was both painful and motivating. Daniel proposed a plan. He wanted to make sure the story reached the public in a way that would hold the hospital accountable, without putting Alina at unnecessary risk. They decided to start quietly, reaching out to journalists known for integrity, people who had a record of exposing wrongdoing while respecting the individuals involved. Alina hesitated at first. She was not someone who sought attention, but Daniel reminded her, "This is bigger than us. This is about justice, about showing that doing the right thing should never be punished. Your courage deserves to be recognized." With careful steps, they began to share the story. They provided documents, emails, and timelines to the journalists, showing exactly what had happened. The more they investigated, the clearer it became that the hospital's leadership had made a calculated decision to punish Alina unfairly. Internal messages hinted that her actions were seen as disruptive, that her race made some executives uncomfortable, and that they were concerned about precedent rather than the patient's life. Alina felt a mix of anger and sadness as she read the words. She had saved a life, and yet the system had focused on protecting itself instead of recognizing the good she had done. As the story gained traction, the reaction was immediate. People were shocked and outraged. Social media buzzed with support for Alina, praising her courage and criticizing the hospital's decision. Messages poured in from other doctors, nurses, and even patients who had heard of her story. Many shared their own experiences of unfair treatment, creating a wave of solidarity that Alina had not expected. The world was listening, and for the first time since her dismissal, she felt seen, validated, and empowered. The hospital, once confident in its decision, began to feel the pressure. Calls from journalists and concerned citizens increased daily. The board faced questions about their ethics, their motivations, and the fairness of their policies. Investigations were launched, both internally and externally, to determine whether the dismissal had been influenced by bias rather than legitimate protocol violations. Alina watched the events unfold with cautious hope. She knew that while this attention was necessary, it also carried risks. The hospital could retaliate, twist the story, or try to discredit her. But she had Daniel's support, and more importantly, she had the truth on her side. Meanwhile, Alina continued her work at the community clinic. The growing recognition did not distract her from the patients who still needed care. In fact, it inspired her to do more. She organized health workshops, reached out to underserved communities, and began mentoring young doctors on the importance of integrity, courage, and compassion. Her story became a teaching tool, showing others that standing up for what is right can have consequences, but also that it can lead to meaningful change. One day, a journalist who had been covering the story asked Alina to give a statement about the hospital's treatment of her. She spoke calmly and honestly, describing the situation from her perspective, emphasizing the importance of patient care and ethical decision-making. She did not accuse individuals by name. Instead, she focused on the principles that had guided her actions. Her words resonated widely, and the story spread to national news outlets. People were inspired by her courage and compassion, and many expressed outrage that someone could be punished for saving a life. The hospital could no longer ignore the mounting pressure. Board members were called to explain their decisions, and the investigation revealed clear evidence that Alina's dismissal had been influenced by bias and fear rather than misconduct. Emails, internal communications, and witness statements painted a picture of a system more concerned with appearances than with the well-being of a patient or the ethics of its staff. Alina felt a mix of vindication and sadness. The truth had finally come to light, but only after she had endured weeks of uncertainty, stress, and emotional pain. Daniel continued to support her through the process, offering both practical help and emotional encouragement. He reminded her to stay focused on what mattered: the patients she had saved, the young doctors she was mentoring, and the community she was serving. He also reminded her that this was not just about personal justice. It was about changing the system so that other doctors would not have to face the same unfair treatment. As the story unfolded, Alina began to receive unexpected messages. Patients from her past, colleagues who had once been silent, and even strangers reached out to express their admiration and support. Each message reinforced the idea that her courage mattered, that her decision to act had not gone unnoticed, and that her actions had inspired countless others. For Alina, it was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, doing what is right could ripple outward in ways she could never have imagined. The hospital, facing public scrutiny and the possibility of legal consequences, eventually issued a formal apology. They acknowledged that her dismissal had been unjust and that her actions had been in line with the highest standards of medical care. While the apology could not erase the weeks of uncertainty and stress she had endured, it was a public recognition of her courage and professionalism. Alina accepted the apology gracefully, knowing that her focus was not on revenge, but on ensuring that the truth was acknowledged and that the system was held accountable. This turning point also allowed Alina to consider the next steps in her career. She had spent so long tied to one hospital that she had not imagined other possibilities. With Daniel's support, she began exploring ways to expand her work at the clinic, create training programs for young doctors, and even start initiatives to advocate for ethical practices in hospitals nationwide. The recognition she had gained opened doors she had never dreamed possible, and she realized that what had seemed like a punishment could actually become a foundation for something greater. As the weeks passed, Alina found herself reflecting on the journey she had been through. From the night she had made a split-second decision to save a patient's life, to the dismissal, the uncertainty, and now the recognition, she saw a clear pattern. Courage, integrity, and compassion, even when punished, could ultimately lead to justice and meaningful change. She also realized that support mattered. Daniel's presence, encouragement, and advocacy had been crucial in turning her story into something larger than herself. Alina's story began to inspire others in the medical field. Young doctors who had been hesitant to speak out about unfair treatment found courage in her example. Patients who had experienced neglect or injustice felt hope that their voices could be heard. And the broader community saw a clear example of how integrity and bravery could challenge a flawed system. Alina's experience became a case study in resilience, showing that even when the world seemed against you, doing the right thing was never wasted effort. By the end of this chapter in her life, Alina felt a sense of calm strength she had never known before. She had faced injustice, endured emotional turmoil, and still found ways to make a difference. Her work at the clinic flourished, her influence in the medical community grew, and her story reached a wider audience than she had ever expected. Most importantly, she had learned that courage, even in the face of adversity, could spark change that went far beyond herself. And while the hospital had tried to punish her for doing what was right, the truth had prevailed. The recognition she received, the support from Daniel, and the awareness she had raised were proof that integrity and compassion could not be silenced. Alina knew that her journey was far from over, but she also knew that she had already made a difference, and that difference would continue to grow, touching lives and inspiring others in ways she could not yet imagine. The events of these weeks had shown Alina something profound. Even when the world seems unjust, courage and truth have a way of coming back to the right person. And while the hospital had once dismissed her, the wider world had finally recognized her bravery, her skill, and her unwavering commitment to saving lives. She had acted with integrity, and that integrity had sparked change, created awareness, and ensured that her story would be remembered, not as a tale of injustice, but as a testament to the power of doing what is right. After weeks of stress, uncertainty, and public attention, Dr. Alina Johnson finally felt a sense of calm that she had not experienced since the night she had been dismissed from the hospital. The whirlwind of events, the patient's miraculous recovery, Daniel's unexpected support, the growing attention from journalists, and the eventual recognition of her courage had changed everything. Yet Alina knew that this was not the end of her journey. It was a beginning. She had been given a chance to shape her future on her own terms. The hospital eventually contacted her with a formal apology and an offer to reinstate her position. While the gesture might have seemed sufficient to some, Alina had changed during this process. She realized that returning to a place where she had been punished for doing the right thing would not be the path she wanted to take. The hospital could never erase the weeks of pain, frustration, and doubt she had endured. Instead, she wanted to take her experience and turn it into something positive, something that could help more people than a single hospital ever could. With Daniel's support, she began planning a new chapter in her life. Together, they explored ways to expand her work at the community clinic into a larger center that could serve more patients and provide training for young doctors. Alina wanted a place where compassion, courage, and skill were celebrated, not punished. She envisioned a medical center that not only treated patients, but also empowered medical professionals to act with integrity, even when it meant taking risks. The work of establishing the center was challenging, but Alina embraced it with the same determination she had shown in the emergency room years earlier. She had learned to navigate obstacles, advocate for herself, and inspire others along the way. The first step was securing a suitable location, a modest building that could be renovated into a fully functional clinic. Daniel helped connect her with donors, architects, and contractors who shared their vision of creating a space that prioritized patient care and ethical practice. As the renovations progressed, Alina focused on building a team of like-minded doctors, nurses, and support staff. She sought individuals who were not only skilled but also shared her values of compassion and courage. Each interview reminded her of why this project mattered. She was creating an environment where doctors could save lives without fear of punishment, where patients could receive care without prejudice, and where young medical professionals could learn from examples of integrity and empathy. The first day the clinic officially opened was filled with anticipation and quiet excitement. Alina walked through the doors, taking in the bright, clean rooms, the well-stocked medical supplies, and the dedicated staff ready to serve patients. She felt a deep sense of pride, not for herself alone, but for the collective effort that had brought this vision to life. Patients began arriving almost immediately. Many had been waiting for weeks or months for access to proper care. Alina and her team greeted each person with warmth, kindness, and professionalism, making sure that everyone felt seen and valued. As the days passed, the clinic quickly became a trusted resource for the community. Patients came not only for medical treatment, but also for guidance, education, and reassurance. Alina took the time to listen to each story, treating every patient as more than just a case or condition. Her approach reminded everyone that medicine was not only about science, but also about humanity, compassion, and respect. The clinic's reputation grew steadily, drawing attention from local organizations and even media outlets eager to share the story of this new, innovative approach to healthcare. Meanwhile, Alina continued to mentor young doctors, many of whom had faced challenges or doubts about their careers. She shared her story openly, emphasizing the importance of integrity, courage, and empathy. She encouraged them to trust their instincts, to advocate for their patients, and to stand firm in their values, even when the system seemed against them. Her experience became a powerful lesson, that doing the right thing often required sacrifice, but the long-term impact could be far greater than any immediate recognition or reward. One afternoon, a young doctor approached Alina with tears in her eyes. She had been facing pressure at her own hospital for speaking up about unsafe practices. Alina listened patiently and shared her own experience, offering guidance and reassurance. "You are not alone," she said gently. "Courage and integrity are not always easy, but they are always worth it. Trust yourself, trust your heart, and keep doing what is right." Moments like these reminded Alina why she had chosen this path and how meaningful her work had become. As the clinic flourished, the story of Alina's dismissal and subsequent triumph continued to inspire people beyond the immediate community. Other doctors, nurses, and patients saw her journey as proof that one person's courage could challenge injustice and spark change. Invitations came for her to speak at conferences, share her experiences on panels, and participate in discussions about ethics in medicine. Alina accepted these opportunities not for fame, but to help others see that compassion, courage, and integrity could drive meaningful change. Daniel remained a constant support throughout this time. He never sought recognition for himself but worked quietly behind the scenes, ensuring that the clinic had the resources it needed to thrive. He reminded Alina to take care of herself, to rest when